The Nexus Combat Institute represented the pinnacle of galactic military education, a magnificent testament to the universe's capacity for organized violence disguised as higher learning. Its architects had designed the facility to inspire awe in visiting dignitaries and existential dread in incoming cadets, achieving both goals with remarkable efficiency. Crystalline towers stretched toward the heavens like accusatory fingers, while training grounds sprawled across continents with the sort of casual grandeur that suggested unlimited budgets and flexible ethics. For 6 centuries, the Institute had churned out the galaxy's most competent killers, all of whom shared certain admirable qualities: tactical brilliance, unwavering loyalty, and the distinct advantage of not being human. This wasn't prejudice. The Institute's board insisted with expressions that suggested extensive practice in front of mirrors. This was simply evolutionary reality, cosmic hierarchy made manifest through careful observation of natural law. The recently implemented species integration mandate had been received with the sort of enthusiasm typically reserved for tax audits and medical examinations. Various member governments of the Galactic Defense Coalition had agreed, after diplomatic negotiations that definitely weren't thinly veiled threats, to allow selected representatives from emerging species to attend their prestigious institution. The term emerging was bureaucratic poetry meaning embarrassingly backward, which itself translated roughly to how did these creatures achieve spaceflight without accidentally exterminating themselves. Humanity, through a combination of political necessity and cosmic irony, qualified for this dubious honor. The Institute operated according to the Unified Species Defense Protocol, a masterwork of military bureaucracy that classified every known sapient species according to their theoretical combat effectiveness. The system ranked beings on a scale, from Class Alpha, godlike battlefield dominance, down to Class Epsilon, suitable for supply logistics and morale entertainment. The classification algorithm considered factors including natural weaponry, enhanced physiology, technological integration, and what military theorists diplomatically termed cultural predisposition toward violence. Krillians dominated the alpha classification with the sort of casual superiority that made other species question their life choices. 8 feet of genetically optimized muscle and bone, enhanced with biotechnology that blurred the line between organism and weapon system. They represented millennia of evolutionary pressure applied specifically toward the art of creative destruction. Their society had achieved post-scarcity economics, primarily because anyone foolish enough to compete with them for resources tended to become resources themselves. At the opposite end of the spectrum, humans occupied a comfortable position in Class Delta, nestled between the Mylari fungal collectives and various species of militarized houseplants. This ranking reflected humanity's obvious physical limitations, their disturbing tendency toward cooperative behavior, and their complete lack of natural weapons beyond crude tool manipulation, and what xenobiologists politely termed surprising psychological resilience. The Institute's current roster included representatives from 47 different species, each contributing their unique perspectives on the fundamental art of making other beings stop existing in tactically significant ways. Theshan Corvée commanded respect through her ability to manipulate gravitational fields with the casual ease of someone adjusting lighting. Miltak Rendis could process tactical data at computational speeds that made artificial intelligences feel inadequate about their career choices. And then there was Zara Okafor. The human exchange student represented everything the Institute found simultaneously fascinating and concerning about her species. Her personnel file listed unremarkable physical specifications, average cognitive benchmarks, and psychological evaluations that used words like stable and adaptable without providing useful context for what those terms meant when applied to human psychology. Her educational background mentioned various institutions, with the sort of deliberate vagueness that suggested either clerical incompetence or information classified beyond institute clearance levels. Zara herself displayed the sort of unassuming competence that made military instructors nervous. She followed orders with precision, completed assignments with efficiency, and maintained the kind of cheerful attitude that her alien classmates found either endearing or deeply suspicious. Her tactical assessments were adequate, her physical performance was satisfactory, and her social interactions were pleasant enough to make everyone forget that nobody really understood what humans were capable of when properly motivated. The Institute's training philosophy embraced what educational theorists called constructive adversity and what honest observers recognized as institutionalized bullying with academic credits attached. The mentorship tradition paired senior students with junior cadets in relationships designed to foster leadership skills, tactical innovation, and the sort of character development that emerged from systematic humiliation under controlled conditions. These partnerships operated according to strict protocols that ensured educational value while maintaining plausible deniability about their true nature. Senior mentors were expected to challenge their assigned juniors through increasingly difficult scenarios, pushing them beyond their comfort zones and into the sort of psychological territory where real learning occurred. The fact that this process closely resembled recreational torture was purely coincidental and definitely not the point. Coreth Vel Thuan embodied everything the Institute considered admirable in a senior cadet, which was either a glowing endorsement or a damning indictment depending on one's philosophical perspective. His genetic lineage traced back to the legendary Vel Thuan bloodline, warriors whose tactical innovations had redefined interstellar warfare, and whose recreational activities had redefined several species' approaches to continued existence. Standing 9 feet tall with musculature that seemed carved from living granite, Coreth represented the absolute pinnacle of Krillian military breeding. His bone density approached that of starship armor plating, his reflexes operated on timescales that made light seem sluggish, and his integrated weapon systems could theoretically level city blocks during particularly enthusiastic training exercises. More importantly, his academic record indicated tactical brilliance that had earned recognition from Institute faculty who typically expressed approval through grudging acknowledgement and subtle fear. Coreth approached his assignment as Zara's mentor with the sort of patient dedication typically reserved for educational charity work. The human would learn much from this experience, he assured Institute administrators. Perhaps she might even develop some marginal competence in basic survival skills, assuming she possessed the cognitive capacity to absorb lessons from her obvious superiors. The Institute's adaptive combat scenarios represented the cutting edge of military education technology, holographic environments, so sophisticated they could simulate any battlefield condition with sufficient realism to cause actual psychological trauma in unprepared participants. These training exercises challenged cadets to demonstrate tactical flexibility, strategic thinking, and the sort of creative problem-solving that emerged when survival depended on outthinking opponents who wanted to demonstrate superior killing techniques. Today's scenario involved urban warfare on a contested colony world, complete with hostile weather patterns, unstable infrastructure, and simulated civilian populations programmed to make morally challenging decisions seem tactically necessary. The exercise would test everything from basic marksmanship to advanced psychological warfare, providing comprehensive evaluation of cadet capabilities across multiple combat disciplines. Coreth entered the simulation chamber with the confidence of someone whose genetic modifications made failure a theoretical impossibility. His enhanced sensory systems immediately cataloged every tactical consideration within a 12-block radius. His neural implants processed probability matrices faster than most species could formulate conscious thoughts, and his muscle memory drew upon centuries of warrior tradition encoded directly into his DNA. Zara followed with the sort of unremarkable competence that had characterized her entire Institute experience, her equipment properly maintained and her expression pleasantly attentive. Other cadets gathered in the observation gallery, their recording devices activated in anticipation of educational entertainment that would provide conversation material for weeks to come. The scenario began with textbook precision, hostile forces engaging from multiple vectors with the sort of coordinated aggression that made military theorists weep with professional admiration. Coreth responded with the fluid grace of someone whose ancestors had been solving similar problems since before most species had developed written language. His movements a perfect synthesis of raw power and technical refinement. His commentary, delivered for Zara's educational benefit, covered everything from optimal firing positions to proper breathing techniques during combat stress. The human nodded politely at appropriate intervals and maintained the sort of attentive silence that suggested either deep learning or complete bewilderment. Either outcome suited Korath's educational objectives perfectly. 30 minutes into the exercise, the scenario's difficulty escalated according to programming designed to challenge even elite warriors. Enemy units with enhanced capabilities and sophisticated tactical coordination pressed their attack with the sort of relentless aggression that separated adequate soldiers from legendary ones. Korath adapted smoothly, his combat algorithms shifting into higher operational modes as circumstances demanded greater focus and intensity. It was during this escalation, while Korath was engaged with a particularly troublesome group of simulated hostiles, that the educational moment occurred. The Krillian warrior had been in the middle of explaining proper suppression fire techniques when he felt something grab his ceremonial combat braids from behind. Not his equipment harness, not his weapon systems, but his actual hair, in a grip that suggested both complete tactical ignorance and breathtaking disrespect for established protocol. The action was so unexpected, so fundamentally inappropriate, that Korath's enhanced reflexes actually experienced a processing delay. In 6 centuries of Institute history, no junior cadet had ever committed such a breach of military courtesy during combat training. The gesture violated so many regulations simultaneously that disciplinary computers would require extended processing time just to calculate appropriate punishments. Korath turned with the sort of controlled patience that had made his instructors weep with pride, ready to deliver the kind of educational correction that would ensure this particular lesson was permanently encoded in the human's primitive memory systems. He found himself looking down into Zara's completely calm expression, her grip on his braids steady and her stance suggesting she had no intention of releasing them voluntarily. "You should probably let go now," she suggested conversationally, her tone carrying the sort of polite friendliness typically reserved for discussing weather patterns or meal preferences. The suggestion was so absurd, so completely backwards in its assessment of the tactical situation, that Korath actually experienced something resembling amusement. The sound that emerged from his vocal cords carried clearly through the simulation chamber's audio systems, reaching the observation gallery where other cadets were frantically adjusting recording angles to capture what was obviously about to become Institute legend. "Little human," Korath began, his voice carrying the sort of patient condescension typically reserved for explaining basic physics to very young children. "I believe you have fundamentally misunderstood our respective positions in this educational scenario. You see, I am a Krillian Alpha-class warrior, genetically optimized for combat supremacy across 18 generations of selective breeding. My bone density exceeds that of most starship hull materials. My muscle fibers operate according to principles your species cannot even theoretically comprehend. And my combat training commenced before your homeworld achieved rudimentary spaceflight capabilities." He paused, allowing these facts to penetrate what he assumed was her limited understanding of galactic military hierarchy. "You, on the other hand, are human. Your species' greatest military achievement, according to Institute historical records, involved the successful deployment of kinetic projectiles against large mammals. Your physiology is so remarkably fragile that exposure to most galactic standard environments would terminate your biological functions within minutes. Your reflexes operate on timescales that my people consider geological in their leisurely pace." Other cadets in the observation gallery murmured appreciation for this impromptu lecture on comparative military biology. Korath was renowned for his educational speeches, and this one promised to become a classic example of mentorship through constructive humiliation. Now, given these fundamental realities of our respective evolutionary backgrounds, Korath continued, his grip on Zara's wrist tightening slightly for emphasis, "Perhaps you might reconsider your suggestion that I should be the one to modify my current tactical position. After all, the laws of physics, genetics, and military common sense all indicate that the sentence never achieved completion. What happened next unfolded with such velocity that most observers required multiple replay cycles to fully comprehend the sequence of events. Zara's free hand, which had been hanging casually at her side, moved in a motion that Institute sensors could barely register. Her fingers found specific access points in Korath's combat armor with surgical precision, triggering emergency release mechanisms that had been installed for medical emergencies and equipment malfunctions. Her grip on his braids shifted slightly, providing leverage for a maneuver that bypassed every defensive system Korath's genetic modifications had provided. The Krillian Combat Enhancement Suite, designed to counter directed energy weapons and kinetic impacts capable of destroying buildings, offered no protection whatsoever against an attack that circumvented its operational parameters entirely. Zara's other hand found Korath's spinal column with the sort of anatomical precision that suggested extensive practice in Krillian physiology. Her fingers slipped between armor segments like someone following a technical manual, locating nerve clusters that even Krillian medical texts classified as theoretical vulnerabilities rather than practical targets. Korath's enhanced nervous system, optimized for lightning-fast combat responses and tactical processing, became the instrument of his downfall. Every upgrade that made him faster and stronger also made him more susceptible to precisely calibrated neural disruption. His motor control systems crashed so completely that he couldn't even formulate proper vocal responses to his situation. The spinal extraction itself was performed with the sort of clinical efficiency that suggested considerable familiarity with the procedure. Zara's grip found the exact pressure points where vertebrae connected, applied force that overcame even Krillian bone density specifications, and executed a technique that Institute medical databases would later classify as biomechanically impossible given documented human physical limitations. Korath's spine separated from his body with a sound remarkably similar to breaking celery, accompanied by various wet-tearing noises that made several observing cadets immediately reconsider their nutritional choices for the remainder of the training cycle. The entire sequence, from initial hair grab to completed spinal extraction, lasted approximately 1.7 seconds, according to Institute chronometers. Korath collapsed in a manner that violated several principles of vertebrate anatomy, his 9-foot frame folding in directions that evolutionary biology typically prevented. His nervous system, suddenly deprived of its primary coordination infrastructure, began transmitting random signals that caused his extremities to move in patterns resembling either advanced interpretive dance or severe neurological trauma. Zara stood over his convulsing form, still holding his spine like some sort of educational trophy. Her expression remained perfectly composed, as if she had just completed routine equipment maintenance rather than performed what was technically both assault and impromptu anatomy demonstration. The observation gallery achieved the sort of complete silence typically associated with vacuum exposure or mass extinction events. Recording devices continued capturing footage that would eventually crash Institute servers when cadets attempted to share it with friends, family, and military history enthusiasts throughout the galaxy. Institute medical teams materialized with response times that suggested they had been positioned for exactly this type of educational emergency. Their treatment protocols, designed to handle everything from training accidents to full-scale combat injuries, proved completely inadequate for addressing voluntary spinal removal scenarios performed during routine mentorship activities. Medical emergency in Simulation Chamber 12. The automated systems announced with artificial calm that convinced absolutely nobody. Please remain in position while we determine what the hell just happened and whether our insurance policies cover this sort of thing. The aftermath developed with the sort of bureaucratic efficiency that made military investigations seem casual by comparison. Institute officials materialized like well-organized predators, their inquiry protocols covering everything from regulatory violations to potential diplomatic incidents that might destabilize galactic military cooperation agreements. Someone was definitely going to provide explanations for this situation, and the only remaining question involved whether those explanations would occur in formal tribunals or carefully worded reports to various government intelligence agencies. Zara submitted to questioning, with the same composed demeanor she had displayed while performing unauthorized spinal surgery on her mentor. Her responses were polite, concise, and completely unhelpful for determining exactly what had occurred or how similar incidents might be prevented through improved training protocols. Yes, she confirmed, she had removed Korath's spine during the educational exercise. No, she did not consider this an excessive response to his instructional methodology. Yes, she understood that spinal extraction was not typically included in standard mentorship curricula. No, she did not require psychological counseling to process the experience. Institute medical teams worked frantically to address Korath's condition, which presented unique challenges that their training programs had somehow failed to anticipate. Krilian physiology could theoretically survive spine removal for limited durations, provided appropriate life support systems maintained essential neural functions. However, the psychological implications of having one's fundamental assumptions about natural superiority literally extracted from one's body created complications that no amount of medical technology could adequately address. Korath remained conscious throughout his treatment, his enhanced nervous system ensuring that he experienced every moment of his transformation from apex predator to educational demonstration material. His attempts at communication produced sounds that Institute linguists would later classify as either a previously unknown dialect or extremely sophisticated expressions of existential distress. The investigation revealed several uncomfortable facts that Institute administrators would have preferred to keep classified at levels requiring special clearance. Zara Okafor's personnel file, upon more thorough examination, contained information gaps that represented either systematic clerical errors or evidence of data deliberately obscured by parties with advanced security protocols. Her psychological evaluations mentioned exceptional stability without specifying what she remained stable during. Her physical assessments noted adequate performance metrics without explaining what those metrics were adequate for achieving. Her educational background listed various specialized institutions as training sources, with recommendation letters that were either classified above institute access levels or had never existed in any accessible database. Most concerning, further investigation into human military doctrine revealed discrepancies between official documentation and observed capabilities that suggested humanity's peaceful exploration mandate might be significantly more complex than diplomatic reports indicated. The Institute's species integration mandate underwent immediate review, with particular attention directed toward selection criteria for human participants. Future candidates would require enhanced screening procedures, psychological evaluation by specialists trained in human behavioral analysis, and possibly supervised training environments capable of containing whatever humans considered standard operational procedures. Korath's recovery progressed slowly, complicated by the fact that Krilian medical science had never anticipated needing to reinstall spines that had been voluntarily extracted during casual educational conversations. The surgical procedure required techniques borrowed from 7 different species medical traditions, several experimental therapies, and what physicians diplomatically termed aggressive hope. Even successful spine reinstallation could not address the broader psychological implications of his educational experience. Korath's worldview, carefully constructed around principles of genetic superiority and natural hierarchy, required complete reconstruction along entirely different theoretical foundations. His rehabilitation included extensive counseling sessions designed to help him accept concepts like humans might be more dangerous than advertised, and perhaps superiority involves factors beyond measurable physical specifications. Other Institute cadets processed the incident according to their individual psychological frameworks and species-specific threat assessment protocols. Some concluded that Zara represented an exceptional case, an outlier that proved nothing about general human capabilities. Others began treating all human cadets with the sort of careful respect typically reserved for unstable ordnance or hibernating apex predators. The Institute's administration confronted difficult questions about curriculum modification and safety protocol updates. How does one incorporate spinal extraction countermeasures into standard military education? without acknowledging that the fundamental assumptions underlying that education might be catastrophically incorrect. The diplomatic implications proved equally challenging to address. Various galactic governments demanded explanations for how their carefully selected elite warriors could be reduced to vertebrally challenged educational examples by species they had classified as tactically negligible. Defense agreements, military cooperation treaties, and resource allocation protocols suddenly required renegotiation in light of updated threat assessment data. Humanity's official response to these concerns demonstrated the sort of diplomatic sophistication that made experienced ambassadors question their career choices. Human representatives expressed appropriate regret for any misunderstandings, while declining to provide detailed explanations of their species' actual operational capabilities. They characterized the incident as a training miscommunication and suggested that future military cooperation might benefit from enhanced interspecies protocol development. The Institute's revised policies reflected lessons learned through expensive practical experience. Human cadets would receive modified training schedules that acknowledged their unique physiological characteristics and culturally specific approaches to conflict resolution. Combat exercises would include enhanced safety protocols, medical teams trained in exotic injury patterns, and possibly tranquilizer systems for all participants regardless of species classification. More significantly, the Institute's mission statement underwent careful linguistic revision. References to natural hierarchy were replaced with collaborative leadership development, while species-based tactical optimization gave way to inclusive strategic innovation. These changes reflected growing institutional recognition that galactic military education might benefit from acknowledging observable reality rather than theoretical preferences. Zara completed her institute training cycle with the sort of unremarkable performance that administrators found deeply unnerving. Her grades indicated competence without excellence, participation without dominance, and capabilities that were clearly sufficient for graduation without providing useful intelligence about human limitations or actual potential. Her final evaluation employed language so carefully neutral that it could have described kitchen appliances or weather monitoring equipment. Institute officials had discovered that attempting to assess human cadets using traditional metrics was comparable to measuring stellar distances with instruments designed for furniture assembly. The broader implications of the incident propagated through galactic military culture with the sort of slow-motion transformation that made strategic planners simultaneously excited and terrified. Combat academies throughout known space quietly updated their admission policies. Species classification databases underwent extensive revision, and several government intelligence organizations began recruiting cultural anthropologists specializing in human behavioral interpretation. The story itself achieved legendary status, transmitted through military communication networks with the sort of ritualistic reverence typically reserved for tactical manuals or religious texts. Each retelling added embellishments, enhanced existing details, and generally transformed a straightforward case of educational violence into something approaching institutional mythology. Some versions emphasized the speed of the spinal extraction, timing it at intervals that challenged several laws of physics. Others focused on Zara's expression during the procedure, describing smiles that could cause plasma to solidify or gazes that seemed to catalog structural weaknesses in alien anatomy. All versions agreed on the fundamental lesson. Assumptions about a military hierarchy were significantly more flexible than conventional wisdom suggested. Years later, as Institute graduates assumed positions throughout the galactic military establishment, they carried this lesson with them into their professional responsibilities. Fleet commanders learned to value human tactical advisors, whose recommendations seemed conservative until enemy forces discovered otherwise. Planetary defense coordinators found that human strategic consultants could resolve conflicts through methods that were simultaneously completely non-violent and utterly terrifying to contemplate in detail. The galaxy, in its accumulated wisdom, adapted to these revelations with the sort of institutional efficiency that had sustained interstellar civilization through previous paradigm adjustments. Documentation was updated, protocols were modified, and training materials expanded to include sections on interspecies combat considerations, and when advanced physiology encounters creative problem-solving approaches. Korath eventually returned to active duty, with several commendations for his contribution to interspecies military understanding, and a medical monitoring implant that would alert him if anyone approached his spine without appropriate authorization. Credentials. His perspective on natural hierarchy had evolved to encompass concepts like contextual advantage and species-specific tactical innovations, though he remained notably reluctant to participate in practical demonstrations of these principles. The Institute's species integration mandate was officially declared a complete success, with participation rates increasing dramatically once word spread that human cadets provided valuable educational experiences for their alien classmates. The program's updated motto, "Preparing tomorrow's leaders through cultural exchange and mutual understanding," carefully avoided any references to spinal surgery or systematic worldview reconstruction. And somewhere, in the Institute's immaculate halls, new cadets absorbed the fundamental lesson that their predecessors had discovered through practical application. Superiority was indeed a measurable quality, hierarchy was indeed a natural phenomenon, and both concepts became significantly more interesting when viewed from horizontal positions, with one's skeletal structure in someone else's educational custody. The universe, it appeared, maintained a sense of irony about such educational opportunities.